Hello, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about 5 decks that are in the bottom of tier 2. Should be seeing a lot more play. I could be like all these other content creators and be like, these are the best 5 decks in Pioneer, but then I'm encouraging what I don't want, which is a very undiverse meta, right? Because if you go based off of just pure by top 5, you would say, oh, there's Rakdos Minrage, there's Green Devotion, Parhelion, White Weenie, Is It Phoenix? You could argue a little bit about Azorius Control or Bant Spirits, but what you're doing is basically pushing on new people to these 6 decks, and basically the format is so undiverse, and that's not really what we should be doing as content creators. We should be trying to find the niche golds, cards, dig deep, try to find decks that could be interesting, that we wouldn't mind seeing coming up on the ladder or increasing their net worth. So these are basically the top 5 decks, top 5 to top 7. I'm not going to really cover them because I don't actively want this to be mainstream. Now, there are some other decks that are upper tier 2 I'm not going to cover as well because Karuga Fire's starting to see a lot of play. I don't need to cover decks that are actually on the rise. I'm going to cover 5 decks that I think are undervalued and should see more play, but they don't. And I think that's mainly because people don't want to take the risk of playing a deck that is in the middle of the bottom of the tiers, tier 2. And then at some point, I'm going to also do a video probably next week on 5 decks that I like in Pioneer, which are also non-mainstream, and hopefully you guys enjoyed both of these videos. So, let's get into it. Hello, it's your host, KebbieG. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, also the bell notifications. Don't forget to check out the sweet stuff that's down in the description down below. So starting off, we have Angels. Now, this is basically a slightly different variant, and depending on how you want to interpret it, you do get a similar feel of like spirits. It is big flyers, potentially. It clogs up the board better than spirits, and it's not as fast as spirits, but it has a better late game overall. And of course, like Bant Spirits, we have Coco. We have a decent power level of Angels. Gaida of Font of Hope is the core piece that really amplified the power level of Angels. Realm Walker for card advantage. We have Resplendent Angel. We have Righteous Valkyrie. Sarah Paragon, brand new out of the last set, has definitely seen increase its playability. A couple copies. You don't want too many of them because of Coco. But, 27 creatures that hit with Coco is just over bare minimum, because usually it's 26. And then you have Youthful Valkyrie, which is another solid 2-drop from the Angels. And you have Bishop of Wings for life gain to help stabilize against hyper-aggressive decks. Now, you could argue that you could cut some lands, honestly. I would probably cut this down to 22, 23. Increase my creatures a little bit, so Coco is less of a whiff, but that is completely up to you. This is based off of a deck that has 5-0'd recently. And then the sideboard-wise, we have Archon of Emeria for the combo-ish style decks. We have Damping Sphere to deal with not necessarily mono green, because it can stop Nykthos, but it's more for Lotus Field. It also hits on a few other decks that try to cast multiple spells, like Is It Phoenix? We have Guardian of Faith as a way to protect our board from a Wrath, so it's good against control. So this deck does have some flexibility when it comes to that. We have Redain, also pretty decent against control. It makes their Supreme Verdict cost 6, so that's pretty solid. We have Rest in Peace for the Greasefang matchup, Shaper Sanctuary for Rakdos mid-range, and then we have Wandering Emperor as kind of a catch-all. If we know that we're going to bring in Rest in Peace, we might want to cut back on Cocos, and Wandering Emperor is pretty solid, and exiling a Parhelion seems... No, I guess you can't exile Parhelion, but catch my drift. You could definitely eat something, and I have a little bit more of a mid-range package. So, Angels, I think, are underappreciated. I think they're like literally 0.5% of the meta, and it's not warranted. They're definitely better than that. So, if you're wanting to spice things up a little bit at your FNM, and you like to play Bant style decks, definitely consider Bant Angels. Now, next on our list, a deck that I'm going to be featuring probably next season, and I really am excited to play it. I have not actually played Bar Class, and the deck is overall pretty sweet. It definitely gets a bonus with the brand new Bodyguard. Now, we do run 4 Mox Ambers, because it's pretty sweet when you're all playing nothing but Legends. And we have a Ezekiel's Chariot as a mid-range package. We have some Domries and Xenagos, so we have some Planeswalkers. It has a little bit of everything. Like I said, we got the brand new card. I cut back on some Gallias and Targnar, because you really don't want more than 3 of something, right? Because it is legendary, you don't actively... You want to have a diverse board, not necessarily casting the same creature over and over again. So, because they're legendary, it's restricted, but Burgee is too important, and it's going to eat a removal spell most likely anyways, so that's less important. We have Oath of Nissa to help us, cast these, also dig for our creatures. And land-wise, it's pretty stock standard, right? We have forests, pathways, stomping grounds. So overall, I think the deck is actually pretty solid. A Braid, we covered this in my Staples video. It's a pretty good Magic card. It deals with artifacts and Greasefang, so it works. Alpine Moon, Cage. It's nice to have a companion. That's a huge bonus. We have a couple Clothis, more for Greasefang matchup. Magma Sprite, should probably be the new card. I probably need to switch that. Natural State for some small artifacts and enchantments. And Volley is pretty good in the current meta. So, all these lists will be in the description. If you want to pick them up, you just download the link, click more, and export it. I recommend trying these lists. I think splashing and making things more interesting. And Pioneer is a huge bonus. Right now, it's very congested at the top 2 decks. Rakdos Midrange and Mono Green Devotion have been seeing too much play. And I think, honestly, we should start looking at some other strategies that are just as fun, just as strong, and can, diversify what we're doing in the current format. So, Bar Class, I recommend it. I'm definitely going to make this one adjustment, because this should be the new card, which is basically a better version of this. Outside of that, this deck looks pretty good, solid overall. Having 3 Clothis, I think, is really good in this current meta. So, it's good against Mono White for a life gain. It's also pretty good against Greasefang. So, alright, so next on our list is another Coco-based deck. This time, it is Bolus' Citadel. A deck that I have faced previously, and I lost on turn 3. This deck is very explosive, so keep that in mind when you're looking to pick it up. You definitely should get some riffs in with the deck before you just take it anywhere. You really need to know what the perfect hands are, probably, and that you're fine-tuned to play it at your FNM. But overall, the deck is really good. It leverages Mayhem Devil, as well as 5 of the elves, and then we of course have Wosh Rider to sack and hopefully gain enough life. It looks like with the newer list, okay, never mind. So it's pretty easy to pick this deck up and definitely try it. I recommend trying this deck. This deck is pretty fun. It gains life through Innkeeper, which is fine. It used to also run Cutthroat. Depending on how much life gain you really care about, it might be worth picking up some Cutthroats for this list. Making slight adjustments, but it's all up to you. You can customize this list a little bit, right? There's definitely a lot of cards in this list that are kind of like have to be here, because the goal is to ramp to Citadel on turn 3. You need to do that for this deck to be successful. And overall, it helps that Priest of the Forgotten Gods adds 2 black. So that really helps ramp you. the deck plays 22 lands. It runs a little less than 24 because of the fact that once Citadel comes down, lands are irrelevant. You need just enough lands to guarantee enough in your opening hand to be able to get to the point of dropping down a Citadel on turn 3. Now, Assassin's Trophy is kind of a catch-all removal spell. Fatal Push you bring in against other elf-based strategies. You might have to cut or trim down your Coco and etc. But you could afford to basically bring in 4 cards, probably, in Game 2, Game 3, depending on the matchup, right? So, we have, other than Liberator. Liberator you could bring in, because it's basically going to replace a creature, so your Coco is not worse, right? If you bring in 4 Fatal Pushes, it goes down to potentially 26 creatures, which is the bare minimum with Coco. So, everything outside of Liberator is definitely, could affect your Coco hit, so you could cut a couple Cocos and some X spells and still be okay. But I'm just going the fact that if you do it and keep Cocos in, definitely realize that you're on the cusp of basically having some whiffs with Coco, but that's fine. Now, Thoughtseize, pretty good against control. If you know the deck is trying to actively fight your combo, you definitely want to bring in Thoughtseize for that matchup. Liberator is pretty self-explanatory. If you have in a match against a matchup with heavy artifacts and enchantments, definitely bring that in. Leyline of the Void is definitely for the Greasefang matchup. Fatal Push, pretty good, like I said, against Rakdos Midrange. Mono Green Devotion. You want to be able to hit the elves in Mono Green, so that way they can't go off before you. Because once you start going off, you're going to win that matchup. In Assassin's Trophy, like I said, it's a catch-all. It hits lands and any kind of permanent, so it definitely will help you bridge some gaps. I definitely would probably bring Trophy in over against Mono Green because of the fact that you hit Nick those and take them off of it. They get a basic forest, but that's fine. Or I wouldn't snipe a elf with it because then you just kind of ramp them naturally, so I wouldn't recommend that. That is a sweet list. Let's get into the next one. All right, so next on our list is Grinning Ignis. Now, this is an elemental combo list. Also playing Coco with Hazard's Monument as a way to decrease the cost of Grinning Ignis. And the deck wins by either Devilish Valet, Defiler of Instinct, or it. That's actually it. Now, we have Evolution to help sack something to get our Valet or a Defiler. Now, we do get a decent amount of infinite life, so that should help you stabilize depending on the matchup you're facing. But overall, this deck is actually quite functionable. It has a lot of Risen Reef triggers. 21 lands plus 2 MDFCs really lets this deck push its way into being consistent with its lands, but not having issues with getting too flooded, especially since Forehedron is pretty solid as a ramp creature or as a land. And it's elemental, so it triggers Risen Reef. Sideboard, it's pretty decent. We have a Braid for the Greasefang matchup, else hit mono white. We have Prowler as our graveyard, semi-graveyard hate. You want it to be able to be hit by a Coco, so that's pretty relevant. We have another Defiler of Instinct for certain matchups. Go off a little bit more extreme, and if they have a bunch of 1/1s like elves and stuff, it's probably nice to be able to have a way to ping those creatures down, kind of like how Mayhem Devil does to control the board. We have 2 Outland Liberators, again, artifacts and enchantments. We have Rending Volley 4 of. It's really good in this current meta, especially against spirits. This deck is just trying to slow down your opponent until you combo off. The deck should consistently be able to combo off, so keep that in mind. There shouldn't really be, it shouldn't really take any hits or anything like that. The deck has a solid backup plan, which is just kind of going semi-aggro. But overall, the deck definitely wins by Grinning Ignis. We have Oozes for more Graveyard Hate. That also could be knocked down by a Coco. Then we have Safekeeping. If we know there's going to be removal for Ignis, we definitely could bring that in. So, if you guys are interested in a sweet list like this, like I said, all 5 of these lists will be in the description. if you want to get them. And I think each one of these, depending on what kind of playstyle you like, are all sweet and they're all pretty strong. So they definitely, you could take them to your FNM or 5-0 league with them. No problems asked. And I think they're actually not that bad in the current meta. Let's get into the last deck, which is a little bit more of it's a little bit on the edge. All right, so the last deck is a deck that I semi-brewed. Is it Dragons? It's a deck that I think actually is going to be pretty relevant and pretty good in the current meta. Control is kind of on the cusp, but like it needs something, and potentially a 2-mana counterspell is exactly what Control needs. We have a couple Glory Bringers, 4 Gold Spans, and 1 Nimbizit Parhoon. This is mainly for the Control matchup, which is why we have the second one on the board. So you bring that in against Control, and they can't counter it, and hopefully it should be able to take over the game over something like Glory Bringer. Glory Bringer is more for the, dealing with small creatures, mono white. We have Auron's Epiphany, so that it does bring in some of the concepts that Goldspan Dragon had when it was in Standard. So we do have Auron's Epiphany. We do have Galvanic Iteration. We have Anger of the Gods, 1 main, 2 side. So that way, if we do face a very low to the ground aggro deck, we could definitely stabilize. Take out mono whites, creatures before we get going ourselves. We have Shatter Skull Smashing for a little bit of removal and land. We have a Temporal Trespass as another extra turn spell. 3 Treasure Cruises, which is something really nice that this deck gets access to. Most control decks don't really care about this, but we're also kind of a tempo-ish style, right? Version of Control, because we are trying to win on the back of Dragons. So it is nice to be able to turn through our deck, find more counter spells. Now, we have Big Score as a way to help us ramp, and it gives us treasures, so it's really flexible in that regard. We have 4 Considers, 4 Impulses, since, like I was mentioning in the Staples video, depending on what the deck is desiring, this deck cares about just staying alive until it wins by its main game plan of Goldspan Dragons. So, we don't need removal that hits face. A Bolt is all you really need, just to keep the board in check. And it's 1 mana, so that allows us to remove something and leave up protection. And then we have 2 iterations and 4 ops. Now, we definitely could increase our counter spells by a few. That is definitely a possibility if you're interested in doing that. Definitely be free. If you're wanting, this is more of your style of a deck, definitely export it. Make some adjustments. You definitely could add counter spells 5 through whatever. And it probably should take ops position. The rest of the deck is, I think, pretty stationary. So I recommend probably cutting opt. It's probably the next worst card in the deck. Because you definitely don't want to cut your dragons, because you need a certain amount of them in hand. At least 1 consistently in your hand for the scorn. Land-wise, it's 22 plus the 1 MDFC. So it should be able to consistently curve out efficiently. Sideboard-wise, we have Gust for the mono green matchup. Like I said, Anger's for mono white. Disdainful Stroke is for also mono green, helps there. Lava Coil, this definitely should be replaced with the brand new Obliterating Bolt. So keep that in mind. We have another Nimbizit for control. Spell Pierce is kind of a catch-all thing. It's really good if we know that the opponent is on a lot of non-creatures. And we're on the draw, right? Because we are at a disadvantage. So it's definitely good there if you're on the draw. Thing in the Ice helps also with Anger of the Gods against really aggro decks. So we can definitely stabilize with 2 Angers and 3 Angers and 3 Thing in the Ice. That should be enough to stabilize us against mono white. And then we have Unlicensed Hearse for Graveyard Hate for the Greasefang matchup. So keep in mind, another important thing you could do here is against Greasefang, Thing in the Ice is actually not that bad, right? So we know you could turn on the Parhelion. In response, you cast your instant opt, flip over Thing in the Ice, bounce the Parhelion because it's a creature. That is something you need to keep in mind with gameplay patterns with this deck. So there is definitely ways to fight a lot of the top decks of the format. Like I said, it's up to you if you want to, remove some ops, increase some counter spells, like negate, whatever you're thinking is in your current FNM meta. Definitely take that in consideration. But this deck is pretty stock. It's solid, I think, right out of the gate. It does have some extra turns. So, and you could also play the Foretell counterspell if you really want. That way they have less information about if it's Epiphany being foretold or the counterspell. So they might think it's Epiphany, play right into your counter. Those are all suggestions. I definitely think this deck is pretty awesome. Now, like I said, I'm going to come back again. I'm going to do the 5 decks that I personally like. Actually, I like this deck too. Keep that in mind. A lot of these decks here, I actually like. They're just not my top 5 decks that I would play through League, just because they're not necessarily 100% my style. So, but each one of these are definitely competitive. And if you guys like this kind of content, let me know by hitting that like button. Because if I see a lot of likes on a video, I'm more likely to return to that concept. You guys like the fact that, let me know in the comments if you like that I am covering decks that are not mainstream meta. Because I think that's really important. Because I do not want a pioneer format where everyone just gravitates to the top 5 decks and not consider that there's other decks out there that could do just as good and compete and might actually be better in the current meta. So, like I said, let me know all that down in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification. That way you get notified when I do the next video, like I said, which is the top 5 decks that I want to play. And give you a hint, one of them has Siege Gang Rhino. So, that is pretty sweet. And there's definitely some other decks that are tier 2 and tier 3 that just have not seen a lot of play. And it's unjustified, and I really want to start shedding some light on some sweet decks. So, like I said, until next time, hope you guys have a great rest of your day.